General Secretary of the Alba Party and former SNP official. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on TalkTV. Tell us a little bit about how the process is working, because, of course, we know that 3 individuals, including Nicola Sturgeon herself, were arrested some time ago. But Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, was rearrested yesterday and then charged. There's an active ongoing police investigation. We have to be quite careful about what we say. But what do we know that he has been charged with?
Well, you're quite right to say that in Scotland, when a person is charged with a criminal offence, the case becomes active in terms of the Contempt of Court Act 1981. And Contempt of Court in Scotland is actually quite a bit more strict in terms of its application than in England. So we really obviously need to be careful of any commentary or analysis at all in relation to the charges. But the matter of fact is he's been charged with embezzlement, which is effectively theft. We don't know any more details than that. I think obviously the police have spent a lot of time conducting an investigation. They've now referred a report to what's known as the Procurator Fiscal Service in Scotland, and I think that everyone that has justice at heart now has to just respect that process, see where it takes us, and of course everyone, including Peter Murrell, is entitled to the presumption of innocent until proven otherwise.
OK. Thanks for talking to us about that. We will respect, obviously, the sensitivities around it. So I'm going to ask you, where did it go wrong for Nicola Sturgeon? Because both her and her husband were really the UK's ultimate power couple. You had the leader of the Scottish government, the First Minister of Scotland, the chief executive and leader of a party. It felt at some points like, the SNP could sort of walk on water, defy political gravity. Nothing seemed to stick to her. And it stick to the SNP particularly to Nicola Sturgeon. Where did it all start to go wrong for them? Now the SNP is languishing in the polls. It's got Hamza Yusuf, sorry, I almost called him Hamza Useless, as its leader. Where did it go wrong for the SNP?
It goes back to the old adage that, you can tell people all day long that it's sunny outside, but, one day they're going to walk outside and they're going to get wet in the rain. And I think that's what eventually was the undoing of Nicola Sturgeon, that she put style over substance. And it's related to, like, the big announcement yesterday was the rollback on climate. So when Alex Salmond was the First Minister, he managed to reduce emissions in Scotland by 46% of the 1990 level. That was, a very difficult process, the acceptance of onshore and offshore wind farms, the transition that the majority of Scotland's electricity was generated through renewables. I mean, these weren't easy things. But then under Nicola Sturgeon's leadership, that 46% only managed to get to 49.1% over something like a 7-year period. And of course, during that time, she was taking selfies with, any celebrity she could find at climate conferences. And that's what I mean by style over substance. At the end of the day, when Alex was First Minister, his government used to start every day by saying, what we're going to do today, and let's go do it. Nicola's government, the way they operated was, what are we going to say today, and let's go and say it. They said a lot of things, they made a lot of promises, they declared a lot of emergencies and said we wanted to be world leading in lots of fields. But the reality is they never delivered on the things that they promised. And then, of course, they got themselves ultimately undone when they entered the world of gender politics, which, ultimately was the downfall of Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, Chris, really, really interesting saying that this is a sort of style over substance in the way people living in Scotland were governed. Let me just pick up, I think, on this extraordinary U-turn by the SNP government. And let's not forget, an SNP government propped up and in coalition with the Greens. They'd made a sort of virtue signalling hope that they would be able to reduce emissions, be 70% of the way or 75% of the way to net zero by 2030. That was a full handbrake turn, U-turn that they had to, do in the Scottish Parliament yesterday. This leader of the Scottish Labour Party, Anas Sarwar, eviscerated Hamza Yusuf in the Scottish Parliament yesterday. This is a national humiliation, surely, to have set this overambitious virtue signalling target and just have had the rug torn from under you.
Well, we have a Green Party in government in Scotland, so it's quite astounding. It does beg the question of what will they be willing to accept and sell their souls for if they're willing to, scrap green targets to stay in government. It was 2009 that Alex Salmond actually created the world's first climate change legislation. And, that is only 15 years ago, but if you can think back to then, we have changed as a society so much. People used to put all their waste in one bin. We all now embrace recycling. And I don't accept the argument that people they're not interested in the environment. I think everyone cares about the environment, but we want to understand what we're being asked to do, how much it's going to cost us to do it, and what are we going to have to sacrifice to do it. I'll give you a good example of why the Scottish Government haven't met their targets. The Scottish Government cut £200 million from the affordable housing budget. So that's a budget that could have built modern homes, they could have been energy efficient, and they transferred that money into an active travel scheme. And that scheme has effectively spent every penny of that building cycle lanes. Now, I'm all for people that want to cycle, but I don't see how you save the planet by allowing effectively, a group of privileged middle-class people to be able to cycle through town centres, when you could have instead invested that money in some of the most poorest people in society, giving them quality housing, affordable housing, which is cheap to heat. These are the big ticket items that can help save the environment. And, the SNP themselves, they've poured cold water on Scotland's North Sea oil and gas industry for the last 8 years. And that's allowed the UK government to go off the hook, because one of the biggest game changers in saving the planet, meeting Scotland's climate targets, and in fact helping deliver Europe's climate targets, would be carbon capture. But because the Scottish Government have been so, hostile to the North Sea oil and gas industry, they've allowed Rishi Sunak off the hook when he can say, well, I'll promise I'll deliver a carbon capture scheme, that's the Acorn scheme in the North Sea, and then 1 year later, we've not seen a single pound of Rishi Sunak's money. So, these are the big things that, as an independent supporter, I would love to see us be an independent country so that we can just get on with, putting net zero requirements on every licence on the North Sea. We can,
Even though, Chris, I'm sure you'd accept that in terms of the SNP's performance, they've completely failed to make the progress, hit the target they set themselves. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting to hear from you on a broad range of subjects.